Good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know, I'm Adam from Box of Tricks, and we are joined tonight by Vinay Patel. Vinay, do you want to do your own introduction? Kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and about your career to date?
Yeah.
Sorry, totally put you on the spot.
No, I'll do the very short version. Yes. Hello, I'm Vinay Patel. I'm a writer. I'm based in South East London. I've been a playwright. I've been writing plays since 2011, 12, and I've been doing it professionally, I guess, as a writer since 2015. Yes. And I also write for television. I've written a couple of one-off dramas, a couple of episodes of Doctor Who, been in like a billion writers' rooms at this point, and just starting to run some of my own. I've done a little bit of radio, done a little bit of film, I'm doing some more, so I'm basically kind of writing anything that anyone will pay me for, and hopefully that I'm also interested in.
Polymath. Brilliant. So yeah, I guess my first question is, yeah, what made you write in the first place? What was the instinct to pursue that as a career?
Mostly, if I became a doctor, I knew I'd kill someone. So I thought if I did something in the arts, then I definitely wouldn't. But mostly, I guess, I did a lot of other jobs before I went into writing, I guess. I'm sure a lot of people here relate to the fact that it doesn't always seem like a viable thing. I didn't have a lot of connection to the arts when I was younger. The London borough I grew up in is one of only two that doesn't have a permanent theatre building. So I didn't really see much of it when I was younger. But I guess, you know, that classic thing of I was always that kid at a kitchen table writing lots of stories. And I think it took a long time of me doing stuff like working on a popcorn stall, working as a technician at a film school, doing some very strange installs for Morrison's when they really wanted to get into making their own content, which was a very short-lived, very, very strange part of my life. But it just, yeah, I think writing was just always a thing that I felt passionately about in terms of, you know, my own stories and things I wanted to say. But also I think just in terms of being a dramatist, I was always really sure that I liked the idea of sharing a story with as many people as possible. And so I was really obsessed with like mainstream stories more than anything else. I wasn't like a very niche kid or anything, apart from some sci-fi stuff. And so I guess I was always really interested by what it meant to sit with a story with other people and how that becomes a site of conversation. I loved how all my friendships when I was younger were forged on us repeating catchphrases back to each other from various terrible TV shows, which seems like such a small thing at the time, but you realize, oh, that is the basis of people's entire lives in lots of ways. And so I think I just had lots of different thoughts about how writing felt like a communal and very galvanizing thing to do, and that's what specifically led me towards theatre, I guess, in particular. And then it as a professional thing, I was doing lots of part-time work alongside writing for ages, and it took me, like, truthfully, the only reason I made the jump into doing it full-time, because I was always worried about doing that, was that I got that first TV commission and it had to be written very quickly, and there was just no way to do anything else along the same time. So I had a block of 6 months where I was just doing the writing, and it just sort of, I got the next job off the back of that, which was similarly quite intense. And then it turned out I'd been not having any other sort of proper job for a year and a half, and it was a bit too late to try and back out of it. So I was like, God, I have to make a run of this, otherwise I'll be in trouble. But yeah, I mean, I have a big thing about how being a good writer who writes good work isn't the same thing as doing it full time, especially in terms of theatre, but we can come on to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back a couple of steps, so you did an MA in writing, is that correct?
Yes, I did that in 2010. I was 24. I was working as a corporate filmmaker at that point. And in my MA, I was still doing that. So I'd like run somewhere in the middle of lunchtime, shoot something, come back to class, do the stuff, go home and edit in the evenings. Because again, the idea of doing that as a job didn't seem good. And also I couldn't afford to not do that. But what was really nice about that year was I met actors. I didn't do any theatre or anything at uni. So I met actors properly, who are some of my favourite people in the world. And I think actors are the thing that make, stories in theatre seem real. And the idea of finding a group of people who you could all sort of be broke with together, but still trying to do stuff, felt really, it was sort of this thing I needed to sort of push me into just trying a little bit more with the writing. So I ended up doing I entered every single scratch night I could find. I think I was did 14 short plays or something in the space of the year. That was all just me trying to push at the edges of what I thought my tastes were. So with every single one of those, I was like, let me try something where there are no cuts, or something where there are 100 cuts, or there's one actor or 20 characters, and just sort of see. Got very messy, but I think it was that I felt like I had the license to be that sort of person because I had enough time in that year in that MA, and I don't think I'd be doing what I would be doing without it. I don't think anyone needs to do an MA to be a writer, to be clear, but just for me, because I wasn't very confident and I didn't really do anything all that artsy beforehand. It was really important for me.
And so, by the sounds of it, kind of collaboration is kind of key part of your process, why you tell stories for stage and screen. Is that kind of fair to say?
Oh yeah, for me, there's no reason to be a playwright unless you get the payoff of being in a rehearsal room one day. I think it's my favorite place to be in the world, and the idea that you only get you might write something for 2.5 years and you're in a rehearsal room for 4 weeks feels really cruel to me, because that's the point where it's it is my favorite. I love cutting my work or clarifying. I really like shaping a play within the rehearsal room. I'm not very precious with, I can precious with intention, if I'm very clear what that is. But I really like how malleable thing can be. I love the idea that, maybe a sound designer will come in with something and that sparks something in your head and you change the trajectory of a scene. And the way you kind of bake a play together on that first production of something feels really lovely. In fact, I remember a play of mine just had a second production up at the Octagon in Bolton, and watching it was really lovely because partly because you see the ghosts of your own self in it, but also because I remember watching it and going, oh yeah, I remember why we made that decision, and I remember when that was something completely different, and we just changed that because that actor was able to cut off a paragraph with just the look. And there's something really lovely in that, to the extent that when I'll go back and read an old play, I sort of feel that process in it, more than the horror of sitting down and writing it and all the research that goes in it. Just the memories that all come from that collaboration. I'm just always chasing that, I think.
And kind of talking about process, can you talk us through a little bit about, from the seed of an idea, how you go from that to building up a script and kind of fleshing out a story?
I think the thing I've learned is that it's different every time. It depends on what the project is. So, and also how much time you have to do it. So it will usually start with, for me, a thought that I can't quite get out of my head. But I also know that if I articulate it just as I have it, everyone will hate me. So I try to think about what is it in that idea that I'm almost a bit scared of. And so I'll sort of pick it apart into its component bits, and then I'll go, what sort of character represents that part of that? What character represents that part of that? What product? So, which for me is that's a useful way of building up an idea on a thematic level. And you have all the components within it trying to speak to that idea. Other times it will just be a question for myself, or a feeling. So when I did Adventure, which is the play that was at Bolton recently, the thing that was in my head was seeing my grandparents' generation sort of fading away, and thinking about how big their lives were in every sense, and wondering if they felt like everything that they did had been worth it. And so naturally from that, you track back and go, okay, if something has been worth it, that means you have a set of decisions those characters have made. And so I tried to plot out from the start of their lives to the end of their lives, what are the decisions that they made that shaped, and then I focused in on which ones I thought were the most important or the most dramatic or the most interesting or spoke to the ideas that I was fascinated in. And then I layered on top of that a sense of not wanting it to feel like a historical play. So stylistically, I knew that the style of it, I wanted to feel like it could be two teenagers in the world who feel like their country doesn't work for them and want to go somewhere else. So that has take a story from 50s India and try and make that feel as relevant today to any young person watching it. And yeah, I would just sort of layer on top of that initial idea my instincts and my feelings of like what I want a thing to be. The most recent couple of things I'm writing are a play about George Lucas and the creation of Star Wars. And that just came from a place of going, how did the person who was when I found out he was supposed to direct Apocalypse Now, it like really like screwed me up. And I was like, how did someone who's meant to be like a very big indie filmmaker become the person who's like the most populist person? And then that becomes a frame about like why we make art and who we make it for and the instincts that guide us in that process. And once I have that sort of frame for a play, it becomes again easier to shape what characters and what scenes and what moments you need in it. And then the other thing I'm doing is a sci-fi version of The Cherry Orchard. And that was like maybe the most purest instinct of anything I've ever done, which was going, what would be the version of this play that would make 15-year-old me come and see it? And it was like, oh yeah, like a lot of brown people on a spaceship, and like a character that looks a bit like my grandma. Like those are the things that make me go and see a thing I had no familiarity with. Which is obviously like not the most like intellectual thing, but they all come from like different places for me. And I think it's just sort of chasing that instinct and sort of interrogating it and turning it around a little bit and see what falls out of it.
When you pursue that that question or that, you know, the impetus to write a story, how do you know which medium to go for, like in terms of telly or, you know, or stage or even radio? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know from the off, or does it need a bit of gestation before you know?
Not always. I think I've actually done relatively few things that flip later, so I guess I must know relatively early. But for example, like, so with that Star Wars thing, I think like a lot of people ask me why it's not a film, why did I want to write that as a play? And the reason I wanted to write it as a play is that I feel like the stage is such a exciting place to put stories about potential, because on a stage, like sort of anything can kind of be conjured and anything could happen, whereas there's a real there can be like a real realism to even it, like something that is you know, a fantasy thing that's got a very literal sense to it, whereas I think stage just holds the tension of something coming so much fully. That sounds really pretentious, sorry, but it was like a thing of like that story, you know, it starts with them all as kids when they're you know, they're all in their mid-20s when they're starting off that story. And I was like, if I did that as a film, you'd be looking at those characters going, does that look like the real person? Does that look like what the 1970s are? There's so many other things around it. Whereas like I knew the focus of that play was about people in that moment and being excited about ideas and potential. And actually the way you could strip down a story to those components more easily in a theatre made a lot of sense. And also it's really playful and really silly in lots of ways that would come off as a bit glib, I think, on a film, or you wouldn't get away with it, or people get angry with you. Whereas I think it's sort of what's asked for and what you're driving yourself towards. And you can be more, because you can be a little bit more poetic with it, I think you then you get better access to what it feels like to be those people. Whereas I think with something, with a film, you're pushed more towards telling the literal story of an event, and it doesn't necessarily catch the feeling the same way that I think theatre is really good at doing. Like I think theatre is magic at holding an emotion in a room and everyone sharing in that, and I knew that was like always going to be a big part of that play, sorry, of that like story. So like a play just sort of on an emotional level felt like the best place for it. But there are things like, so when I did, so the one-off drama I did for the BBC was something called Murdered by My Father, which was sort of, it's a story about an honor killing, which is based on like real life research. And I didn't come to them with that story, but I did ask myself, you know, people have asked me to do sort of like kind of stage versions of that, and I don't think I would do that. And the reason I wouldn't do that is because that story, it came from the factual department of the BBC, it came from charities who are really interested in getting that story more widely known. And so if the impetus is to create something that is more widely known and out there, then to me that was like a no-brainer. That's a piece of television, and especially like it being on BBC Three and being easily accessible, and not just being on like a terrestrial. If the job of that as a motivation, you know, apart from you wanting to do a good piece of work, was to go, you want to put this in front of as many people as possible and create a conversation around it, then yeah, it seems like like television for me is still sort of the best place to do that. I would struggle a little bit to do that for the stage, although I've seen some brilliant stories around that sort of thing which do that, are very emotive and very powerful. But yeah, just in that instance, it was very clear what the mission was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And kind of continue on that theme of, you know, kind of TV versus theatre. I mean, I saw the original production of An Adventure at the Bush, and like what really struck me was exactly what you're kind of talking about, is that imaginative space that you have and the permission you have in a theatre to kind of go anywhere. But you had at the heart of it kind of a love story between two people, yeah. And it was very much about, you know, that, but it was also had this kind of epic quality about immigration and that story, and also I know there was a, you know, personal story for you, you know, kind of heavily inspired by your grandparents. I mean, like telling that story in that medium, you know, for the stage. I mean, did you feel a certain responsibility in telling a story that was based in you know, personal reality?
Yeah, I did. I think, but it's weird that I think something about it being a play made it feel less pressured. Like I got approached by a lot of people to turn that into a piece of television or something, which I don't want to do, or a film, because again, there need to be a literalness to it. Whereas I think I did want it to be an intimate story and also an epic story. And again, I think theatre holds that distance quite well. Whereas if you do that on screen, it gets overwhelming quite quickly. Whereas for me, the core of that story was a portrait of a marriage, and you can hold that more strong. Like it's like, again, sitting with those feelings of those characters and those actors for a span of time, in the same space to them, I think does that better than anything. I guess there was like, you know, there was a responsibility for it in the sense that I was like, the happiest day for me in that production was when The Bush hit its box office target, because I was like, if I try and do this big swinger thing and it sort of falls on its ass, then I'll screwed it for anyone who's coming after me, which was really fun. And they were very, you know, I remember when they said you can have like a long play or have lots of people in it and you can pick which ones you want. And Madney, who was the artist director at the time, to his credit, sort of pushed me to go for the more expansive length of it and to allow us to have like 2 intervals and stuff, because that's what that story needed. And so maybe I guess the responsibility I felt was to go, I get one shot at doing this thing which is very important to me, don't fuck it up, but also like pushed for it to have everything that you need for it, basically. And what that did to me actually is that there was a much neater version of that play, which was more, you know, closer to what I might have learned on that MA. And the real lesson to me was the responsibility I had was sort of to the truth of the lives of those people, which actually didn't fit very neatly into what a dramatic shape of a character journey was. And so I sort of put myself out of my own comfort zone and go, how do I most accurately reflect the emotional trajectory of those lives? And it can be a little bit looser, a little bit messy, or a little bit not what people are expecting. But I was like, actually, I would feel more upset with myself if I made a more digestible version of something that I thought was a bit unwieldy and tricky, than if I sort of tried to really push it to what I think it should. Honestly, something that caught the actual honest truth of it. And I think the nicest way to that story was my grandfather who since sadly passed away, sadly, but one of the characters named after, he came to see it, and I was like, uh-oh, this will be bad. You like, his character's your wife's name and your name on it, and it's a vague version of your whole life. And if you hate it, I think I don't know if I could live for myself. But thankfully, yeah, he, and it's not, you know, it's not hagiography. It's like it is sort of like pushes some hard things at them. And but yeah, thankfully he was a strong enough man to go. They loved it, or he turned off his hearing aid, one or the other. He came out smiling either way, and that to me is like where I felt like, okay, I've taken that responsibility and it's landed with the people it needed to, so that's fine.
Amazing. And am I right in saying that's the first of your plays to be remounted?
Yeah, with a proper professional run. Yeah.
So how was that experience, kind of seeing it in Bolton?
Very strange, because my grandmother, who was the last of my grandparents, went into hospital on the day I was going up for a press night, and I didn't know what was going to happen. So I was just watching this play that is about the life of my grandparents that ends with like them at the point near the end of their lives. So watching it with that in mind was mad. And then she sadly passed away that Saturday. So it was like a very weird, almost like the best, most comforting place I could be. Yeah. To be like sort of sit with that story with them, but also like it was very intense. But that aside, it was one of those things where you're like, oh, you've done that way better than ever I would have imagined that would be, or like, oh, that's a bit different than I expected, and or that feeling is moved earlier than I thought. And so it was constantly surprising me. And I think the nicest thing I could say about the production is I got to a point where I'd forgotten that I'd written it. And I was just sort of enjoying it. I mean, I would enjoy it because obviously it's exactly my bag, because I wrote it, but like I felt I didn't feel self-conscious about it. It was just like they did a really beautiful job with it. And for me, a big part of that play actually, and talking about the community thing, is I really wanted the central roles there to be a platform for sort of newer actors, and a couple of those roles were debuts, and they both knocked them out of the park, and I'm really pleased for them. But yeah, it was a little bit like watching what I imagine it is to watch a kid go off to university and go, something terrible might happen with that, and I do have some responsibility into what's happened there, but at the end of the day, I can only let it happen, and let a thing make its own choices. And so in that way, I guess it was that, you know, the way everyone always says the reason they love theatre is because you can do anything, anyone can make any choice, and it can live on after you. It was that real test, like, do I really believe that? Like, watching something like this, do I think that's true? And yes, it was a real joy.
Amazing. And coming back to TV, you touched on Murdered by My Father, which was your first original commission.
Yeah.
Right, saying? Yeah. And could you just talk us a little bit about how that came about, and that journey from the commission, and how you approached and kind of took that story on?
So it's a very atypical process for telly, but what happened is they emailed my agent asking if they had any experienced TV people who'd be interested in doing this. I wasn't an experienced TV, but I'd written like a couple of spec things because I thought I'd be more focused towards screen earlier in my career. But yeah, somehow, oh yeah, one of the producers had read BRITS, which was my first play, which is like a one-man play. And I went in to talk to them, not thinking I would get it, but a bit like what I was saying earlier in terms of process, I was sort of looking at the materials that they'd given. They had a sort of a rough idea of the sort of story they wanted to tell, which was based on like real life events. And I just looked at it and I said, the thing here that I don't understand is the dad. Like, I don't understand that character. So almost weirdly, in an opposite way of what you think you would do, I was like, I'm more interested in trying to figure out what's going on with that person, what's the thing that powers there. Otherwise, like, you don't need a drama to tell you that like murdering your child is bad. So what is the use? What's the social use of something like this? And I talked to them about the thing that I actually wanted to model it most closely on was A View from the Bridge, because I learned it's like there's a real similar thing about weak men trying to take action, and how that has big consequence, you know, the end of that play where you come in and going, you know, I want my name, like, is a real, someone who's like feels very shamed, is acting out because of that. And I was like, there's a real universality to the way that both patriarchy, but also very particular the weakness of men, and the way that it's tried to control women in response to that has a wider relevance than the particular set of people that we're looking at in terms of this story. And I said I wanted to construct this story, that story around that idea, and then everything else we sort of put around it. But at the heart of it, that's the thing that I was interested in. And I think that's what whenever you go to do any sort of TV thing that isn't your own thing, what'll happen is, just for anyone, like, it's like they will come to you with an idea, seed of an idea, usually a lot less than what I got given for that, and they will ask you for what your perspective on it is. So in that sense, that is a typical part of the process. And so, yeah, if you know what your sort of angle from your material, your emotional response to it, that's really useful. But yeah, from there, like, I got the job. I got that at the end of May, and they're shooting in like September. And that felt like a very tricky thing in terms of responsibility and, you know, getting it right and how you represent that and who you're representing there. And I struggled with it a lot. Like I tell this story a lot, but I turned it down when I first got it because I was like scared of it. And I just didn't want to put that sort of story into the world. Frankly, I was like, I want other representations than this. But I think also that to me was a good lesson about why intention behind stories matter. And it was the producer who was of the background of the people depicting, telling me that it was something that had come from charity she'd worked with for years, rather than a sort of rip from the headline schlocky thing. And when I realized that was the case, it made it easier to sort of put yourself in service of the story, rather than going like, here's like my amazing thing that I want to do. And so that humility was quite useful to take through the process. And yeah, I just burned myself on it quite a lot. We tried different iterations of the story. We got Adeel Akhtar onto it before it finished this first draft, which was like a terrifying meeting, because you had to go and like talk to an actor about how good the thing you're going to do is going to be, and hope that they believe you. And I just sort of had in my head Darren Aronofsky talking about trying to get Mickey Rourke to do the wrestler, and he said like, I'm gonna get, like, if you do this, like, you'll win like an Academy Award for it, which he did. I didn't quite say that, but I was like, to Adeel, I think you're a brilliant actor, and a more brilliant actor than maybe the stuff that you've been doing reflects. Like, you're a brilliant comic actor, but I think you could be a very good dramatic actor. But also I was trying to make clear to him that the reason I wanted to do it and what I was interested in was that dynamic between the father and the daughter, and sort of what the interiority of that guy was, and basically express, if we're talking about like collaboration, that people try to express to the actor why I thought, one, it was a good thing for them to do, but also why that process needed them, and why it was what they would find in it that might be challenging or interesting to them. And luckily he said yes, and that helped the project a lot, because I'm knowing who's in the script obviously helps a lot. But also it's funny, like, it changed the dynamic of that as well, because I think the initial iteration of that, we were thinking of someone who's a bit more imposing and a bit more like immediately someone you might look at to go, oh, that person is physically capable of that degree of violence. But what was really interesting about having Adeel in that part was, one, he's like quite a smaller, like, he's mainly known for comic stuff, so there's both a meta version of yourself that doesn't quite see him as that person because of all the comedy stuff, but also there's just, within his physicality, he's like not the person you sort of expect, which is also, you know, useful, unfortunately, in terms of real life, in that, you know, you don't have to be that sort of person to be the sort of person who's capable of inflicting that on your loved ones. But also it just sort of, when I was right, you pushed away from some of the more obvious things about his aggression, and it became more interesting dynamically. So like when he's talking to his daughter, him being a little bit more vulnerable, and that seeming, us being able to feel that both in terms of his physicality and performance, suddenly puts you in the place of his daughter a little bit more, believing when he does say he loves her, you can sort of believe that a little bit more. It does feel like a place for a moment in what is eventually a very violent script, it can feel like a tender and loving thing, and you can buy why she would feel that in that moment more. So it does. So again, it was a real lesson to me about how even just casting that person can then, if you're lucky enough to have time, allow you space to drive the script in different direction. And we were very lucky actually that we got to have like a week's rehearsal. So we got to play around with some stuff, like things when you have like children involved and there's like a young boy in that story, just him getting to play with the actor playing his sister and the actor playing his dad, and just sort of seeing what their dynamic was, meant that I could sort of write around what connection they made in those moments, so you can make those bits feel real and a bit more comfortable for the younger actor, and things like that, which again I loved doing within what was quite a fraught project. Like that stage of it was, I think, most interesting to me.
And in terms of, you know, such a big commission, you know, relatively early on, you know, like did you feel, you know the weight of responsibility that kind of came with that in terms of delivering and everything else? How, you know, like just talk us a little bit through the process of working with did you work with a script editor on it, or?
Yeah, we did, but yeah, it's sort of different again because it was so fast. It wasn't usually what happened is the script editor will be the sort of mediation between the producer and you, and you'll talk to the script editor a lot and then the producer a little bit at a time. But just because it was a smaller team, because again it was out of the factual department rather than drama department, everyone was all just in on the same conversations. So in that way it was a little bit more flattened than what you get used to usually have. But yeah, it was you can be late in theatre but you can't be late in telly, basically. Especially because they've got like a set date which they're going to shoot, and if you miss it you start costing them like proper money, and but more than that is you start making life difficult for like you know, the design department, the costume department, other people who have to look at your script and try and base stuff on it. The later you give it to them, the more stressful you're making things for them. And that's always the thing that haunts me. It's like less the money and more like, oh, I'm screwing it up for someone else who's trying to do a good job. And that's always like the shame. I need to sort of like push myself to be quick on it. But yeah, normally it won't be that fast, for better or worse. But yeah, it was in that case.
And kind of, you know, we talked about it a bit earlier, but about like the process in a kind of collaborative working, like in a writer's room, you know, how that differs to writing an original drama, you know, and you know, because you've written for Doctor Who, for example. Yeah. Like what's that process like, and how does that differ in terms of your role as a writer?
Yeah, so every writer's room you'll ever be in will be completely different, especially in this country where they can't really afford to do them very properly. So like in the American version model, you'll be like bought out for like 6 months and that's your only job, and you are become a brains trust, and you are just delivering ideas and doing things in a timely fashion in a way more structured machine. Here it's usually run, unless it's like big money show, like it's usually sets of like a couple of weeks at a time, maybe a month if you're lucky. And the whole process, every single time, it's driven towards what is it that the showrunner needs that they in themselves don't have. Like you'll have people who write entire shows by themselves and don't need writers' rooms at all. But the best rooms I have are one where it's very clear, or at least the showrunner has made clear, or the head writer or whatever title they have has made clear what it is that they need you to be there for. And the worst ones are when that isn't clear, and then just backing around ideas for ages, which can be fun for about 2 days, and then you start getting really demoralized and everyone's not really sure what's going on. But essentially it is, so like one I ran end of last year, it was it's an adaptation of a book, and I was really interested in it was one of those books where the best kind of a book to adapt, which is where it's good, but it's not so great that if you added stuff, people would be upset with you. And there was definite spaces which they needed more story within. So I basically sat down with that group of people and tried to imagine that world together with them for like the first few days. Because I knew the thing I needed was, I need this part filled out, this part filled out, this part filled out. I need a greater idea of what I think we would do with these characters. And so what can be a real problem with writers if everyone's head's in a different place, so you're all telling a different story. So with that, I just made sure we spent a lot of time making sure we were talking about the same people. So like I'd ask everyone in the room to tell me what they thought, like what the verbs or nouns were about characters that they thought, and we just put them all up on the board, and then we went through the book like sort of beat by beat and went, is that true or is that in our head? Is that true or isn't that head? And we just sort of like, it was interesting how much was sort of a constructed reality and how much was actually in the material. So yeah, the wholeness of that week was basically breaking down what we had and then trying to expand out into how we could fill it. And that's what I needed to basically, because I'm writing this series Bible at the moment, and that's what I needed to do to make that work for me. The next time I run it, it will probably be about taking individual episodes and storylining them with a bit more clarity and detail. But yeah, sorry, that's a bit rambling, but it is essentially like with Doctor Who, that changed completely over, like I worked on 2 seasons and like a bit of this last one as well. And the first one was basically us trying to make as many stories as possible. So if production caught up with them, they could just have more like stuff ready. And so in that case, someone would come in, either Chris, who's the head writer, would come in with an idea, or one of the other writers who were attached to it would come in and they'd be like, oh, I've got this image as a start, or I've always wondered about this strange hill behind my house, or something like. So we'd have a germ of an idea, and then we'd sort of knock that around between us and go, oh, we could do this, or like, would it be fascinating if this? So there's a lot of very open thinking. And then what would happen is we'd throw that all up on a board, and then we would try and have a bit of like closed thinking, essentially, where we took those ideas and tried to place them where they might be in a story. And then you just slowly start shaping it, and then you start asking yourself questions about, you know, like Chris would lead that of like what he wants, what the Doctor needs to be at this point in the series, etc., etc. And so that was like quite a very organic and very free way of doing it. And then what'll happen is those boards that we sort of put, we put like every episode was four acts, and we had 5 beats per act. So those were like the story points, and that would go to individual writers, and those writers would write it up into more fulsome outline, about 10 or so pages, and then from there you go to script. So that had a very distinct progression. And then what happened, as in like with my first episode, wrote it up completely, way too big. They couldn't afford to shoot it. And so I went down, when was it? Yeah, at some point in March, and just me, Chris, and the script editor storyline by ourselves for like a day and a half, completely with some of the locations already set, because like they were already like scouting for stuff. And like, right, we're going to build this whole story around those locations, and here's the stuff I think that's interesting from the other stuff, and I want to junk all this stuff. And it became very fast instead of like doing it over ages. And then I ended up writing that episode in like 4 days, and it more or less stayed the same. So it can go from like you can have all the best intentions in the world, and then what will happen is something will change completely, and you'll have to go off piece. Like even with Murder by My Father, I remember I went to see a film, and I'd handed in a draft, and I felt very excited. I was like, yeah, I'm smashing it. It's like my first telly job. And I got out of the cinema, and the producer rang me and said, oh, that location that you've created is very intimate, intricate love story around. We've lost that, and we can't use it. But we do have Crystal Palace Maze, which was not looking particularly fulsome at the time. It was like I was like, great, okay. So I think, yeah, that's just that other some telly is that things shift really quickly, and you just have to be quite nimble. And that goes straight from the writer's room stage, where it does require you to be very active. You do have to concentrate a lot, and it's really knackering. It's really, really knackering, actually. I think writer's rooms are the most intensive things I've ever done in terms of keeping your morale and your creativity and your energy levels up, as well as watching the way you're interacting with other people, trying to make sure that you're not being the dickhead in the room, basically. And it's very easy to get really excited and talk over people. And so, yeah, it's a lot of it, obviously, like it's collaborative, obviously, but it's also a lot about knowing when to kind of be listening, when to sort of shut up a little bit. And also, if you pitch an idea twice and no one goes for it, don't do it the third time. Just put it away.
Yeah, there must be something quite interesting about the specific dynamics of that room as well, and how that changes it, and and how people like put ideas forward, and how front-footed you should be, and how when to sit back and, as you say, shut up.
Yeah, I think like I've been into rooms that are like been cast quite badly, so like it's a lot of very very good but very dominant voices who again all mean well, but what happens is you end up someone who hasn't spoken for like, unless the person who's running it keeps an eye on it, you'll end up with people who haven't really spoken for like a whole day almost, and they kind of feel like they don't know how to quite bring themselves into. So if you want, I think it is really important, for all sorts of reasons, like if you're going to admit this person, for all sorts of reasons, I think when you are doing that job one day, it is really important that you have an understanding of the writers that you're engaging with in that room, and get to, even if when you're just within it, it's really useful to have a bit of time. This is why Zoom rooms are awful. You want that bit of time around it to get a sense of what people are like, because then you're like, oh, that person doesn't mean to like be like that, or that person is always looking for someone to try and like add something in, and that you can kind of temper yourself a little bit. Yeah, the best ones I've been in is sort of almost self-regulated, because everyone is really aware and is trying to do the best for each other and support each other's ideas. That sort of improv idea of like a yes and thing, rather than going, oh no, we shouldn't do it like that, we should do it like this. It's like, it's always the best when people are trying to build on whatever's been offered, and then you just let the person running it be the big bad person who just knocks things down.
And this sort of follows on, I guess. I mean, you talked about in the past about mental health and about what it's like to be a freelance writer. I mean, what advice would you give to writers to kind of maintain both sanity and kind of mental well-being?
Build your writing around your life, not your life around the writing, which is very much easier said than done, and it's very hard to stick to sometimes. But I think what happens is, have you ever wondered why there's so many like movies around about writers? It's because people get very dull and lose all their friends, and they only wrote the only thing left in their life, which is just writers. And that can happen to you very, very easily, which can be fine. But I think it's very easy to get excited, get very driven, and you just sort of realize that you've got no friends anymore. People stop expecting you to turn up to stuff. That's the worst, when they're not even disappointed anymore, because they just don't think you're going to be there. And it can, because it's it's a very compelling job to have. It feels very exciting. It's a very emotionally engaging thing, and it's so easy to lose yourself in. But yeah, you can really burn yourself out very easily. You can become very boring. Like, I've lost all my hobbies, and I was like, oh yeah, I used to do all those things, and now I don't. I just write. So I think that self-regulation, especially if I've been freelance most of my professional life, whatever job it is, and I think learning to write is learning to work. I think like building a structure for yourself that lets you work in the most efficient manner you can. That isn't always sending yourself to the edge of burnout. And I think we have a real problem with the way we romanticize overwork, especially like in theatre in particular, but also just because writing, you can always do more. Like, you can always go till 2, 3 in the morning, and sometimes that's what you need to do to loosen yourself up. But if you're regularly doing that, if you find that stuff around the edges of your life is sort of peeling away a little bit, I think you just sort of need to check with yourself that you're not lionizing that stuff, because it's not just yourself you're hurting, you're probably like making other people's lives a bit miserable as well. And I think what's good is the industry is a lot more, both television, film, and there is a lot more receptive to that than it used to be. I think like my grandmother passed away, like I said, in February, and I had a real thing of, I had a lot of stuff that was due, and I still had that instinct of going, oh, I need to be like I need to work through this, and I really tried to do it, and then I just sort of had to have a word to myself of going, like, this is all bad, like none of this is like no one's gonna be happy with you turning in something that is terrible. So you might as well take the time. And they were luckily like very understanding. And I think the shift that's happened, so what, my first professional thing I was writing 2015, so it's been 7 years. I think when I started, that was much less the case. Whereas I think now people are more sympathetic to that idea. So I think being able to be honest about where you are emotionally to the people you're working with is really important, and it's much better than trying to hide it and go, oh, I just need to deliver the stuff and like not seem like I'm a problem. Like, I think I think it's useful to come at them with like a plan or a structure or a suggestion of when you might be back. Just again, because other people do get affected by it. But yeah, I think it's always honest to be better to be upfront about those things. And I think understand, even though it doesn't feel like at the moment, that taking a little bit of time off or creating space around stuff is just as important as the writing itself. And you will be if you want to think in those terms, you'll be a much better writing for taking the time. And that's a lesson I always, again, keep forgetting. And then every time I do it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm much happier and much better at this, most taking a little bit of space. And to build that as to part of your process, like look at your diary, block off weeks that are going to be like holiday, not necessarily going somewhere, just go, I'm just going to take that time off, and make those immovable for yourself. Like just do not allow those to get ridden over, because there is always a way you can justify it to yourself, like, oh, I just need to do a little bit more, or actually the deadline might shifted up, or it'd be great if I could get that in. Like, don't do it. Like really just get into the habit of building in that space of time and making that precious for yourself and letting that be known to other people, which I know can be tricky when you're starting out, because you feel like that pressure of going, you want to be the most available thing to them. But I promise you this, every single executive is taking a holiday, right? They are not skipping their holidays, so you don't have to do it. Don't do it to yourself. I'm mostly repeating that just so I can see myself saying it.
I can send it to you as a gift if you like, and you can kind of keep reminding yourself. Amazing. And I'd love to open it out now to the Zoom room. So if anybody's got any questions, Becky, I know that you've put something in the chat. Do you want to ask the question yourself?
Yeah, I can do. Hiya, thank you. I was wondering, I'd be interested to know about the balance of your work in terms of what's you kind of coming up with your own ideas that you're really excited about and bringing people on board with that versus being approached. And then within that, if you find it difficult to know what to say yes to, so kind of keeping that space for your own projects, but also what might take you out of the market for other things. So, yeah,
it's really tricky to get back, and it's a sort of thing, truthfully, you won't know until you've sort of got it wrong a little bit. So I think at the moment, things that I'm doing, 3/4 of them are stuff that I have generated, and 1/4 is stuff that I've been approached about. And that was me having taken a conscious effort to drive it in that direction, because I think it was a bit more like half and half and verging on 3/4 the other way, which was good for me trying to sort of have a life and kind of build a little bit of financial stability for myself. But I was also starting to not really like writing and starting to become a little bit more cynical, which you never want to do. And so I think it is, for me anyway, the way I countered that was to go, actually, I need to make sure that I am working on a lot of my own projects that I'm generating myself. There's the other part of that, sorry. Difficult to say which one to say yes to. So again, like when I started off, I had a real instinct that anything anyone would approach me with, I would go, I can come up with a great take for that they'll love. And you'll do that and they'll be brilliant and they'll want to work with you. You're like, oh no, I don't know if I like, I don't, and like, especially like with telly, right? With telly, if you start a project, you're probably at minimum, you're going to be working with someone for 2.5 years, 2.5 years at least, right? So one, make sure you like the people, like that's the most important thing. If you don't like them as people, you think, oh, they're a bit weird, but maybe it'll be fine. You like, don't do it. You have to really like them, and you have to really trust that they're willing to sort of go with what you're doing. So I had like an original sci-fi thing I was doing, and I had like a bigger company that was interested and a smaller company that were interested. And I went to that meeting with the bigger company, and they were excited, but they didn't really get it. And they were like suggesting things which I was sort of like nodding along to, but in my head I was like, no, that would ruin it. Don't do that. And you're tempted to put it with someone like that because you're like, well, it's more likely to get made. But also one of the very early things I did is like I did a short film for the BBC, which I didn't really like what happened with it. And the shame of seeing the version turn out into something I hated was so mortifying. I was like, I can never let that happen again, especially like a telly thing. It will exist forever. So you have to go, as I did in that situation, with the people who totally get it and who, when you push back on something, they hear you on it. Like that to me is the big thing. If you are willing to go, oh, actually, I don't really want to do that, they understand why, and they're okay with that. So it is for me, it's the people more than anything. But I think the other learning is it's not enough for it to be something like, oh yeah, I could do that. As much as there'll be part of you that wants to be that person, you have to really know what it is in you that will make that something you still want to do in 2.5 years time. Look, your life circumstances might change, in which case it is also okay to drop out of projects. Like I was doing something about the global supply chains and a factory collapse in Bangladesh, and I've got not super deep into it, but deep enough into it that I'd written a lot of work for it and done a lot of research. And I just realized I didn't have it in me to do another thing that was that tragic, essentially. And I battled with that for a long time, but I was just like, I know that those scripts will be bad because I won't open myself up to them. And I felt that was going to be a really pretentious reasoning, but it was really true. I just felt like I felt the heaviness in it, and I just knew that it was just going to be like, this is going to be a horrible thing to write. And I mean, it would always be a horrible thing to write, but I don't have the resilience to do it. And it was fine. Like, that's the other thing, is like, they will always, for better or worse, they'll always be able to find someone else to do it. So don't feel guilty about stepping off of things that you feel like you've gotten yourself into that space with, but always try and do that as early as possible if you can. Does that answer stuff?
That's brilliant, thank you.
Any other questions? Feel free to just unmute and yeah, Annabelle.
Hey, I have 2 questions, if that's okay. So the first question is just, do you have any advice for early career writers in terms of getting things finished, getting ideas into executed, complete things that you can send to people, and then through that just like generally staying motivated with writing when sometimes it feels, you're like, whoa, what's the point?
Yeah. So I have a real thing with productive procrastination, which is I'll try and have 2 things at least going at the same time, and I'll get so bored or so annoyed with the other one that the other one will suddenly become really compelling. And I'll jump to that and do like a little bit on that until I hit that same point there, and then I will just find myself jumping back. So I seesaw in between the 2 of them, and what happens is eventually you do just end up building up both of them, or at least sort of work for me. I think the thing with the finishing thing is just to try and imagine what it will feel like to put that in front of people. Like, I think you have to really sit, like, you know, almost if it's like a piece of theatre, just imagine what it's like to be in a room where they're seeing that moment they haven't quite written yet, but you know, it'll be brilliant. And like, because I think part of the reason that people don't finish things is that what we do is such an abstract thing. It's not like a novel, right? It's like that thing will then have to go through so many other stages, and that to be at this point where you're just alone with it all the time can feel really mortifying and a bit like, God, there's so much stuff that has to happen before this could ever make it anywhere. So I think you have to kind of almost let yourself sit with the feeling of seeing it, what that might be like to, like, at least I find that really compelling, and like that just really works on my ego of going, it'll be brilliant and people will love me, and it'll be like, you know, it doesn't matter that me and my dad don't get on anymore because that play will be out there. So you'll find, like, I think leaning into your ego is never a bad thing, because like for me, like not finishing something mostly comes from a sense of shame or a fact that it won't be as good as I want it to be. So if you can try and imagine it as like the best version of a thing that it'll ever be, that just always sort of like hits your line a little bit. I try to, a thing that'll happen, and it probably happened to all of you in the last couple of years, is you can, if you're doing the same thing every day in the same place, it can become a bit of a rut, and you start attributing the sort of monotony of that routine to the story that you're trying to create, and you can sort of build a little low-key resentment on it. So I'll always try and do like work somewhere else that's not like home every day, at least once a week, or with someone else. The thing I learned on my MA, which I try and do as much as possible actually now, is when I do write in the same space as someone else that I know, that sort of motivates me a little bit, because you can like talk about script problems with each other in between in your breaks, and you can go, okay, we're going to do like 10 pages in this next session, or like you can set yourself little mini goals and have someone who holds you accountable to it, which is also again really useful. So yeah, I basically try and find accountability, think about different spaces, to sort of shake your head out of everything and just try and picture what the best version of that will be and how great it will be for you and all your friends and people you want to love you to see it.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. The second question is, does anyone ever ask about things that you've written? Have they ever equated things that happen in the story to like you personally? And when they ask about that, if this is making sense, like when they ask about that, does that like hinder how you write your next story? Like, oh, do I really want to put that in? Because then people might think that I think that, or people might think that because this character like is very similar to me or similar to someone that I know, like someone who has a name that's similar or something like that. Does that ever like affect the way that you write something?
I mean, there'll be some things where I want people to draw that. I want people to be aware of that. So like with something like an adventure, I named those names after my grandparents because there was something in the gesture of it that I wanted it to feel like a sense of someone being seen, and that being a reality, and like the emotional reality and the fullness of someone's life. So in that sense, I was very happy to tie those things together. Like that wasn't directly me, but it was like you know, people I love and care about. Yeah, it's like, is the worry there that you think that people will just think that you just put your life down there and it's like you've not done any work on it? Is that sort of what the issue is there, or you just think that people will judge you for the things that the character's doing?
Not necessarily judgment, but I feel like if you're an actor, like you stand up on stage and like you're like very vulnerable, but like that's the deal. But then with writing, I don't know, sometimes it's very daunting being like, oh shit, like this is like my opinion, but like, and I'm gonna like potentially like ask someone to put it on and people are going to pay to go see my opinion. So it's like, yeah, kind of like a judgment thing, but like more just like it being directed at you individually rather than like, let's debate this theme on stage.
To an extent, you'll never be able to escape that, unfortunately. I say that as someone who, like, the fun thing about writing something like Doctor Who is 7 million people might watch an episode and, you know, 2 million people hate it. And like 1 million of those will think you have a secret agenda against certain person X or certain person Y. So to a degree, worrying too much about that is not worth the while, because you'll never, if someone doesn't want to be convinced about it, there won't be. I guess, and again, I think basically it's about how open you want to be to that. If you are interested in people in games, like, yeah, actually that is the stuff I think, and you're confident in that, then that's fine. If not, I don't think you owe anyone the truth of what that character is. And I think you can, you know, everyone is a million different people at the same time. Like, in fact, you can only write good characters if even like the bad characters in it have some semblance of you in them. So it's sort of just your job to kind of be all different types of person that maybe have terrible opinions and things like that. Like, that's got to be, you have to be able to, you'll only make good work if you legitimately engage with things that even you might not, like, you find distasteful. Like the example, like I always think about, right, is something like, not that people would confuse this character for this writer, but there's a play called Sing Your Heart Out for the Lads by Roy Williams, which I think is a beautiful, like, incredibly muscular, interesting play. But what I really admire about that play is how the most convincing character in that play is sort of the white supremacist in the pub. And it was really familiar to me because it's sort of part of London. I'm used to those pubs, I'm used to those conversations. But what was so fascinating to me was the reality of what that person is in the world was so fully there. Like, no one was trying to pretend that they were less compelling than they would be in reality. And when you read it, you'd be like, oh, this is very convincing, like, to a degree. But I don't think Roy Williams is a white supremacist. But you have to, even like, and it, you know, it's easy to disguise it, I guess, in some way. I guess, yeah, if you're super worried about it, then I would try and like change the attributes of that character that are, so they step away from you a little bit. But I also think eventually, like, people just they will think what they like, and they just kind of have to own it. Like, yeah, I had it loads with True BRITS, which is like, has a young Asian man on the stage who is vaguely the same age as me, has some biographical details that are different. I remember someone said to me, one of my friends said like something very shitty, which was like, oh, I wish my life story was compelling so a theatre company would do it. And I was like, James, you think that I hit a policeman and got jailed for 5 years? Do you think I have hid that from you? Or like, you know, little things with it. Like, I always point to the things that are so obviously not true and ask them if they think that that's like, if you, like, yeah, maybe if you don't want to get too confrontational, it's not the best thing, but I always try and push that back on people, because I always wonder where the instinct comes from them asking it, and it always seems to come from an insecure place in them more often than not. So again, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, too right.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Adeel in the chat. Her microphone's not working. In regards to editing drafts, do you prefer the process of developing a story when writing a stage or teleplay? And she's particularly interested in that relationship to kind of script editor, writer's room, as opposed to playwriting, where you might be working on your own or with dramaturg or director, etc.
I mean, a dramaturg and script editor have very similar jobs. They're both people who are sort of there to help you clarify the idea that you have and sort of push you to test it out a little bit more. I mean, I like both process. It's trickier when you're writing for someone else's show, for example. That's when it can be a bit like you get delivered lots of notes, you'll respond to them, and then you realize that they want a completely different things the other set of times, and you realize the people you're working with don't really know what they want, and that can be really frustrating. In that sense, theatre is sort of more in your own hands, and you can be like, this has gone messy because I don't know what I want, and at least you can own that. Yeah, I think like a shot, like I've had brilliant experiences writing like the maddest shit for telly, but I've had people who are really on board with it, and it's helped me feel very comfortable in telling really big ideas in the way that you can tell big ideas from stage. I like doing that, but there are some things that are just so big that you know, in terms of length of time, the story you want to tell, that you can only really do that through television. And I've loved working with script editors on something like that, and they've been able to take the best script editors, the ones who can sort of take your intention, clarify a little bit, and put it back to you towards a question that you can actually action within a script. And I think it's not a surprise that a lot of the best script editors I've worked with in this country, at least, have all come out of theatre, because you get used to that sort of dramaturgical rigor right from the jump. And the worst script editors are ones who have felt like they could do that job, not have either, you know, and you know, you can have people who start off as storyliners and soap, and like everyone who works in soap are like the best dramatists you could ever meet in your life, because they have to be good and they have to be fast. And so like no matter where they come from, like you just need someone who's interested in rigor. I've completely gone over what that question meant to be, sorry. But basically, like either of them can be fun. You just need the right people who are interested in your ideas. So like the thing I'm adapting at the moment, the script editor for that is someone I knew from my MA course, and he's been a teacher for he's been a writing teacher for ages, and I basically plucked him out of academia for this project and said, oh, I need this person to be the script editor on this job for lots of reasons, partly because he knows my process very well, because like we sort of trained together essentially, and two, that the project will have a lot of newer writers on it, and as someone who's been teaching writing, he's essentially been doing that kind of script editing job for people who aren't that experienced for a long time, and that's the kind of experience I need for that situation. And I think the relationship those writers on that show will have with him will be a better one because of it. But yeah, you can find brilliant people from all places. They just need to get what you're doing.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, as well, about the kind of different process and different expectations. You kind of touched on it earlier about the difference between kind of TV and theatre, and just, you know, TV, you can't miss a deadline, you know what I mean, and the kind of the expectation there, but also it's a lot quicker turnaround. The deadlines are often, you know, back to back, and you don't get as much time as you perhaps do with theatre, where, you know, there's kind of longer gestation periods and discussions and development, and yeah.
I mean, you can miss a deadline telly, and I have done it before, but it's just a thing of like, you can't miss it if you're getting close to production, basically. Like that is when you just absolutely can't, like, at all. But before then, I think a lot of people who develop telly in this country are used to playwrights who skip a lot of deadlines. So I think they set a lot of early ones knowing that you will fall through it. So I don't mean to terrify anyone in that regard. It's just a thing of the responsibility as you get later on in terms of when you should deliver. Like that becomes part of your professional practice, which is, and you know, sometimes it will be like, I remember like we had a script meeting on a Tuesday late afternoon. And they were like, So we need the next draft for production like Thursday morning, and there's like quite a lot of stuff to do, like not because of stories, just because of situation. And like everyone sort of sat in the room, was like, yeah, that's got to be done. And I just had it in my head, I was like, oh, that's me. I've got to do that. That's good. And you know, those are those horrible moments. Like I did basically end up doing an all-nighter, and I did have to burn much harder than I think is reasonable or fair. But that does just happen sometimes, like that. Like you might have an actor who just like gets ill or decides they want to run away or have an affair and don't want to see anyone else in the world again, which has happened. And so you have to like go, oh, I have to write that person out of the series in a week, and you'll do some like really intense. Those are the deadlines you can't miss. But before then, it's sort of okay. Amazing.
Has anybody got any other questions? Ellen?
Do we have time for two, or I can stick it to one if we need one?
Do two quick ones. Yeah.
Okay. The first one's really, really quick. It was just like when you were talking about balancing writing with working, obviously, and in a living, would you kind of advise that if you're going to do that, if you're serious about being a writer, like get a part-time job, don't take a full-time one, or like make sure you do shift jobs, like, or just be prepared to quit your job if you get a commission, or what would your advice be?
I would say don't rush to quit any job, because the longer writing can be the sort of precious and lovely thing in your life, the better. Like you'll never get to go back to that ever again. You know, it's easy to say from like my position, but honestly, like I miss a little bit those days where I'd sort of come home a bit knackered and go, oh, but I get to spend like a couple of hours in that world and how lovely that is. I think the more fundamental, basically the fundamental answer is whatever life you build that lets you make good work is the one that you should do. And if that's a full-time job, that means you don't have to worry. When you sit down to write, you're not worrying about where the money's coming from. That's the thing you need to do, right? But if it's a thing of like, I can balance it off. I think I can make my life not too stressful by going part-time, which is what I ended up doing eventually, and writing alongside that because I need a little bit more space for that because I think that's what needs to happen right now. Then that makes sense. But I think just always the question is like, what is the life that I need to create for myself that will let me be happiest in creating the best work that I'm doing? And don't like, it is my big bugbear. I think we just really chase people to validate the dreams of like being a writer and nothing else. Like one of the best writers I've ever worked with is still like an A&E doctor. Like he works like lots of shifts and he still writes. He's way more prolific than me anyway. Like he's able to, so he's like an annoyingly superhuman person. But like, you know, Annie Baker teaches. So Annie, I don't think she's got a MacArthur grant. She doesn't have to do that, but she still does it. And I think that probably keeps her grounded and sane. And so probably helps her writing. Like there's so many reasons to do work outside of writing. And too often the only reason people want to write full time is because the world has told them that's the only way to be a valid writer, and a bit of ego sometimes. But I just want to make it really clear that doesn't have to be the case, and you shouldn't think of yourself as lesser because you're not doing it as like a full-time thing. There are so many bad full-time writers, so many, so many. So it's never a marker of quality.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Because I do think that is quite a big thing that people are like, oh yeah, but you know, you don't want to take that job because what if your writing things comes off? And then you're like, oh, I've got no money. like
that is always like the stress that will scream more than anything else. Like there'll always be time for the story, but you just got to be around to make that happen. And so you just always got to, and it just makes you a more humane person. Like it stops you, like it's very easy to shut off lots of work and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's like you end up like letting people down and you don't be the full person you should be. And you're just giving like it to the work and it doesn't deserve it. It's great. Writing is wonderful, but it doesn't deserve the fullness of you in a way if it's going to wreck a bit of your life.
Thank you. The second question quickly was when you do applications and things, especially for screen, they often ask for a pitch document. And I've looked up like, oh, what are you supposed to put in a pitch document? And everything is like, the advice is completely different. I wondered whether you could say what you put in a pitch document.
A pitch document, I would say, in this country anyway, between 1 and 2 pages.
Okay.
Would make it, but like, setting aside like the page length, the most important thing is I would put a relatively brief but clear synopsis that has the ending on it. That doesn't just go ... hilarity ensues or something that is like a a clear sense of where you want to take it. You don't have, it doesn't have to be like you have every detail worked out, but have a sense of where the story is going. I would, and then the other thing I would have really that's important to me is a little bit of a statement about why you want to do it. Like that's the really big thing. And I think that's the thing people kind of forget, but it is also the bit that I find producers connect with. They want to know why you should be the person or why you're burning to tell that, because what will happen is they might just like read that synopsis bit and go, yeah, I can't quite see it. As you might not, because you need the whole script or you need the whole full idea to really, although again, getting better at synopsizing stuff is really important. But I think just the thing that's done so well for me actually is just having that little bit of a statement, and it helps you understand why you want to do something as well. Like, and it might just be, I just want to tell a really fun story. Like but whatever it is, you should know what it is and you should be able to express that to other people. And I think people find that's the bit that people find really compelling. They go, oh, I want to work with that person. I think there's something we can find in that story, but they want to know what it is that you want to do with it. A thing I do now, which I started by accident, I know it's slightly so like with that Sci-Fi Cherry Orchard, I wrote the blurb that I thought would be on the back of the play text for myself before I wrote a word of the script. And I just went, this is the play that I'd go and see, right? I know we're talking about telly, but I was like, what is the thing you could write for yourself that would be like, that sounds brilliant, now I've got to write it. But it's like, that to me has always been like sort of the guiding thing, and like the nicest moments I have, like, and I did that for both that and for like the George Lucas thing. And it was so nice. I knew that was at the end of the drafting process when I could look at my script and go, it feels like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you want to give that first pitch of a thing out into the world within that pitch document.
That's really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting when we kind of talked about pitches, particularly in like relation to like the screenplay award and things like that. Like, actually, the ones that really come off the page are exactly that. They have kind of an essence of the story you're trying to tell within them, you know, and they've got that kind of that flavour.
Well, and I should say, like, that I don't mean that to mean that you should only write personal stories and go, oh, I'm telling this because it's really important to me. I think you should just know why you think someone who doesn't give a single fuck about the thing you're writing would be compelled by it as well. Like, that's the thing I always ask myself is like, if I didn't care about this inherently, what's the thing I would be able to, so the first bit of that statement, I'd always be like, this is why I think it's interesting. And then I'll just always have a little bit at the end, trying to basically make the case for the broader things in it that are more universal or like speak to now, however, or is like the counter to things that are happening now, which is what the George Lucas story is about. It's like all of America is very grim and sad about Vietnam. Let's have a poppy black and white morality tale, which is a sci-fi epic. Whatever it is, you just sort of need to know, what it is for yourself. So I think it is useful to have something in there that is able to then speak to beyond yourself as well.
Amazing. Thank you. Any final questions before we wrap up? Say now. Forever hold your peace.
We're good.
Okay, good. Well, Vinay, thank you so much for it. Absolutely fantastic session, for being so generous and so open and so candid about your writing today. So thank you for that. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's been a fantastic session.